The candles on the cake were starting to tilt, the wax pooling into little puddles on the frosting. I sat at the table with the kind of stillness that isn't calm at all. It's the stillness of a man holding himself together by sheer will. The dining room was dim except for the flicker of candlelight and the amber glow from the bottle of Merlot I'd opened 2 hours ago. Her favorite. I'd even chilled the glasses in the freezer, like I always did when I wanted the night to feel special. It was her 34th birthday. I'd spent the afternoon preparing her favorite meal, pan-seared salmon with lemon butter, roasted asparagus, and a wild rice pilaf. I'd bought a dress I knew she'd look incredible in, wrapped it in silver paper, and placed it by her plate. I imagined her walking in, cheeks flushed from the cool night air, smelling of that vanilla perfume I loved, dropping her purse before throwing her arms around me. At 7:18 p.m., my phone buzzed. Going out with coworkers. Don't wait up. No heart emoji. No apology. Just that flat, clinical dismissal that made me feel like an afterthought in my own marriage. I stared at the text for a long time, my thumb hovering over the keyboard, ready to ask why tonight. But I didn't send anything. Part of me was afraid of the answer. The food sat untouched. The wine lost its chill. The candles burned themselves out one by one until the only sound in the house was the faint hum of the refrigerator. I poured myself a glass anyway and tried to swallow the tightness in my throat along with the wine. 9 o'clock came, then 10, then 11. I found myself pacing the living room, catching my reflection in the darkened windows, jaw clenched, shoulders tense, the kind of look that said you already know the truth, you just don't want to say it out loud. At 12:14 a.m., the front door clicked open. She stepped in, a gust of night air following her. The first thing I noticed wasn't her face, it was the smell. Wine, of course, but underneath it, something sharper, muskier. A man's cologne, not the kind I wear. Her hair was a little messy, her lipstick faded. She kicked off her heels like she'd just returned from a long night of dancing, not from a coworker dinner. She glanced at me with mild surprise, as though she hadn't expected me to still be up. "You're awake," she said, her voice low and lazy. I nodded slowly. "It's your birthday." She gave a small shrug, like the significance of that had slipped her mind entirely. "I'm tired," she murmured, already moving toward the stairs. "We can talk tomorrow." There were 1,000 things I wanted to say in that moment, sharp, cutting words that would demand the truth and strip away the excuses. But all that came out was a hollow, "Okay." She disappeared into the bedroom without another glance. I sat back down at the table, staring at the untouched plate of salmon. The wax on the cake had hardened into an ugly crust over the frosting. My chest felt tight, not from anger yet, but from something worse, something heavier. It was the realization that tonight wasn't just a missed birthday. It was the first time in years I'd looked at my wife and felt like a stranger was walking through my house. The wine tasted bitter now, but I drank it anyway. Because it was either that or let my thoughts run wild with the image of her in someone else's arms, laughing the way she hadn't laughed with me in months. Upstairs, I could hear the faint creak of the bed as she moved, followed by silence. I stayed at the table long after the house had gone still, the only sound my slow, deliberate breathing as I tried to decide whether I'd just witnessed the beginning of the end, or if the end had already happened, and I was only now seeing it. I didn't go to bed. The bedroom door shut with her quiet click, and I stayed in the living room like a night watchman guarding a house that no longer felt like mine. The candles had given up. The cake looked like a fossil from a happier era. I opened the window a crack for air. December slid in, thin and sharp, and the curtains breathed like a sleeping thing. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked twice and then stopped, as if even it knew better than to intrude. My phone lay on the table, black and flat as a stone. I told myself I wasn't waiting for it to light up. I told myself a lot of things. When the screen finally did glow, just a delivery app cheerfully asking for a review of the Merlot, I laughed under my breath, a sound that didn't belong to me. At 1:07 a.m., I poured the wine back into its bottle, a small act of surrender to order. Then I paced. Rugs, floorboard seam, window, back again. The rhythm helped keep the questions from rushing the gate all at once. They came anyway, trickling first, then in a flood. Why did her coworkers matter more than a birthday dinner? Why did she smell like another man's cologne? Why was there a faint glitter at her collarbone I didn't recognize? Memory, faithful and cruel, started replaying the last few months. Little things with big shadows. The gym bag that appeared in September with tags still on it, though she hadn't been to a gym in years. The work events that bloomed on our calendar without details, just late scrawled across them like a shrug. The way she'd started setting her phone face down on the counter and then taking it with her even to the bathroom, screen glowing behind the frosted glass like a secret lighthouse. Sex had shifted, too. Not vanished, not exactly. It had become transactional. Twice a month, on nights when she wasn't too tired, when her body was warm and willing but her eyes kept slipping past mine, like she was waiting for a cue I didn't know. I remember the last time she really looked at me. October. She'd been cold from the rain. I pulled her into a towel, and we kissed in the hallway, her skin tasting of rainwater and soap. She melted, then stiffened, laughing softly and stepping away. "You'll make me late." I stood there with the towel in my hands, the hallway bulb buzzing overhead, wanting stupidly to follow her and not wanting to beg. Another scene flickered up. Thanksgiving prep, flower on her cheek, a playlist humming low. Her phone buzzed. She read it. Turned so quickly the flower smudged the collar of her shirt. "It's work," she said. The lie was harmless in shape and terrible in weight. I knew it then in the way you know a storm is coming from pressure, not clouds. But I set the table and smiled at her mother and passed the pie and told myself marriages have seasons. At 2:19 a.m., the house creaked like an old ship. I made coffee I didn't want, just to have a task, and burn my tongue. The bitter heat anchored me long enough to scroll through photos on my phone. Vacations, her birthday 2 years ago on that rooftop bar, her mouth on my ear whispering what she wanted to do when we got home. Back then, when she said sex, it sounded like a promise. Lately, it sounded like a chore list. The shift wasn't dramatic. It was microscopic, like a slow leak you don't notice until you wake up on a damp mattress. The anger arrived quietly, a clean, bright line instead of the explosion I'd imagined. I wasn't punching walls. I wasn't screaming. I was doing math. How many nights out? How many unexplained Uber receipts? How many Coworker, names I'd never heard before? I pulled up our bank app. There it was, a boutique wine bar across town on a Tuesday. A hotel lounge charge, just Linden, vague as a smirk. She hates that part of the city. Or used to. I tried to script a confrontation. Who is he? Too needy. Are you cheating on me? Too small for the scope of what I felt. I walked to the kitchen and back, mouthing lines like an understudy practicing for a tragically underfunded play. Every version put me in the role of the man asking for an explanation. What I wanted, what I hadn't been able to name until that moment, wasn't an answer. It was gravity, a center of mass that didn't wobble around her choices. So I made myself remember the version of me before her. Stupid 20-something confidence, yes, but also a spine. I'd softened over the years because soft is how you fit two lives together. Somewhere in the soft, I'd misplaced the part of me that could walk away from what hurt and still see forward. By 3:11, the house had that thin pre-dawn silence, like the world was holding its breath. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, the dark shape of her bundled under the duvet. She made a small sound in her sleep, contentment, maybe, or simply a body turning toward warmth. I loved her then, with a helpless, aching clarity, the kind that makes you reach for the back of someone's neck and draw them in. I didn't move. Love, at 3:11 a.m., needed boundaries. An idea started, faint as a candle across a field. Not a plan for a fight, but a gesture, something precise and quiet. My brain tested it the way you test a fence post, leaning to feel if it holds. A gift that wasn't a gift. A message wrapped in satin paper. No shouting, no ultimatums, no begging for stories she would edit on the fly. A silent gift. The phrase landed in my chest with a soft, solid click. I went to my desk and opened the bottom drawer. The old manila folder lay there like a relic from another life. The nearly filed petition from 3 years ago, the time we had a brutal winter, money tight, resentments higher than our thermostat. I'd printed the forms in anger and then tucked them away in fear, the way you might keep a last resort flare. I didn't take it out now. This wasn't the moment to scratch at ink. But I held the drawer open and let the cold thought of it rinse me clean. At 4:02 a.m., the coffee machine clicked off on its own. I closed the drawer and sat on the couch, palms flat on my thighs, breathing until the trembling left my hands. The silent gift continued to form, edges sharpening. A box, a bow, a note with only the truth. No scene, no theatrical sorrow. Just me, choosing to stop narrating a story she had started telling without me. I watched the darkness lighten by degrees. The first thin smear of dawn brushed the blinds. A passing car sent a slow wash of light across the ceiling, and for the first time all night, I felt something like relief, fragile as spun sugar and just as temporary. Morning would make things look ordinary again. It always does, but I had a plan the daylight couldn't dilute. She shifted in the bedroom, a sigh, a rustle, familiar music I'd rehearsed my life to. I stood, stretched my back, and straightened the table. I put the cake in the fridge, rinsed the wine glasses, wiped the rings from the wood. Order, small and stubborn. Then I turned off the lamp and let the pale morning do its work. I wasn't going to ask. I wasn't going to accuse. I would give her something she'd been taking without owning, freedom. The thought didn't feel like defeat. It felt like a door, and I was finally, painfully ready to reach for the handle. By the time the first hint of dawn pushed its pale light into the living room, my mind was no longer racing. It was calculating. The anger that had kept my jaw tight all night had hardened into something colder, cleaner. This wasn't about yelling or catching her in a lie anymore. This was about giving her exactly what she'd been silently asking for, even if she didn't have the courage to say it out loud. I went into the hallway closet, kneeling down to pull out the old fireproof box. The smell of paper and that faint metallic tang of the latch greeted me. It had been years since I'd opened it. Inside, stacked neatly like artifacts from another life, were documents that marked the biggest milestones we'd once celebrated. The deed to our house, our insurance policies, and, tucked between two manila folders, our marriage license. I stared at that thick, cream-colored paper, my thumb brushing over the embossed seal. 10 years ago, I held it with pride. Now it felt like evidence in a case I hadn't realized I was prosecuting until last night. Beneath it was something I hadn't thought about in almost 3 years, a blank divorce petition. I'd printed it once, back during a rough patch when I thought she might actually walk away. But we'd patched things up, or at least I thought we had, and I'd shoved it to the bottom of the box like a bad dream. Not this time. I took it out and set it on the dining table. The pen felt heavier than it should, but my hand was steady. I filled in the blanks methodically, the words almost writing themselves. Irreconcilable differences. Date of separation, today. No children to consider. Each line brought back a memory. The time she had to work late, but came home smelling like someone else's cologne. The sudden secrecy with her phone. The way her eyes glazed over during our conversations like she was somewhere else entirely. My chest tightened, but not from hesitation. This was clarity, stripped of all the what-ifs and maybes. I paused only once, staring at the space where my signature would go. My mind replayed last night. The text at 7:14 p.m. Going out with coworkers, don't wait up. The half-empty wine glasses on the counter I'd poured for us. The dinner I'd spent hours making, cold and untouched. And her walking in after midnight, hair tousled, perfume buried under the sharp scent of another man's cologne. I signed my name. It looked different than usual, sharper, almost like it belonged to someone else. When I was done, I stacked the petition neatly with the marriage license on top, just so she'd see how it began and how it was ending. Then I leaned back in my chair, exhaling for what felt like the first time all night. The paper trail was complete. All it needed now was delivery. I could have woken her up right then, shoved it in her hands, demanded an explanation. But that would give her an opening, to cry, to twist the story, to pull me into the familiar dance where I end up apologizing for even suspecting her. No, this time, she'd open it on her own, and she'd know there was no saving this. The clock read 6:02 a.m. The sun was higher now, the first rays cutting across the table and lighting up the divorce papers like they were some kind of offering. I picked them up, slid them back into the box for safekeeping, and started planning exactly how I'd wrap this little gift. It was her birthday, after all. The morning air had that crisp bite that made your lungs sting a little. I stepped outside, the divorce papers tucked under my arm in a plain folder, the same way you might carry something mundane like tax returns. The difference was, these papers weren't about numbers, they were about endings. The streets were quiet, the kind of quiet you only get before most people have had their first cup of coffee. I drove into town without music, the hum of the tires and the low rumble of the engine matching the steady rhythm of my thoughts. This wasn't going to be some messy scene. No screaming, no plates breaking, no theatrics. It was going to be neat, deliberate, gift-wrapped, even. The craft store was already open when I pulled into the lot. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cinnamon-scented candles and paper dust. I walked past shelves of glitter, ribbons, and cards with words like congratulations and best wishes scrawled in looping gold script. My hand trailed along a row of elegant gift boxes until I found the one I didn't know I'd been picturing until that moment. Matte black, smooth to the touch, sturdy enough to hold the weight of what I was about to put inside. Next, I picked out tissue paper. White, crisp, almost too pure for what it would be wrapping, and a deep red ribbon, the kind that practically begged to be untied. The woman at the counter gave me a polite smile as she rang me up, her eyes flicking from the box to my face like she was trying to guess the occasion. I imagined she thought it was for jewelry, maybe something romantic. In a way, she wasn't wrong. Back home, the house was still silent. She was asleep upstairs, the faint creak of the floorboards telling me she'd rolled over once or twice. I set the box on the dining table, the same table where her untouched birthday dinner still sat covered in foil in the fridge. I opened the box and lined it with tissue paper, smoothing it down carefully so there weren't any wrinkles. The papers went inside first, the marriage license on top, a reminder of where we'd started, followed by the signed divorce petition, where we'd ended. I hesitated for a moment before adding one more thing. A small white card with just 4 words, written in my cleanest handwriting. Happy birthday. You're free now. The ink bled slightly into the fibers, like even the paper was absorbing the finality of it. I folded the tissue over the papers, closed the lid, and tied the ribbon into a perfect bow. It looked beautiful, thoughtful, intentional, almost celebratory. If someone walked in off the street, they might think it held a watch or a necklace, or maybe a plane ticket to somewhere warm. Instead, it held the clean break she'd been working toward in secret. When it was done, I stood there for a while, just looking at it. I realized I wasn't nervous. I wasn't second-guessing myself. The quiet was different now, not heavy like last night, but light, open, almost expectant. I placed the box squarely in the center of the kitchen counter, the same spot where she always put the mail or dropped her keys after work. She'd see it the second she came down. I imagined the moment, the way her eyes would light up first, thinking I'd remembered that maybe the late night with coworkers hadn't poisoned everything. Then the shift, the reading, the stillness. I didn't know if she'd cry or get angry or laugh that brittle laugh she used when she was trying to pretend something didn't hurt. I just knew I wouldn't be part of the reaction. I grabbed my jacket, keys, and wallet. There was no point in hanging around the house, waiting for the inevitable. I had errands to run, a day to live. Let her open it alone. Let her feel the weight of it without my presence to soak up or deflect the impact. As I locked the front door behind me, I caught a glimpse of the ribbon in the kitchen light through the side window. For a brief second, I thought of our first anniversary, the gift I'd given her that year, wrapped in the same deep red. A delicate bracelet she'd worn for months. I remembered the way she'd kissed me that night, the way she'd whispered what she wanted to do before we even made it to the bedroom. That was a lifetime ago. Now, the gift was freedom. Wrapped just as neatly, but stripped of all illusion. I stepped off the porch, slid into the driver's seat, and started the engine. Somewhere between the driveway and the first turnout of our neighborhood, I realized I wasn't thinking about what she'd do next. I was thinking about what I would. The box and the bow weren't just for her. They were my line in the sand, tied up in ribbon and left on the counter like a quiet explosion waiting to go off. And when it did, it wouldn't just blow a hole in her world. It would open a door in mine, and I was already halfway through it. The sound of footsteps woke me before the alarm did. Soft, uneven, like she was still shaking off the sleep from whatever dream she'd been in. I stayed still, one arm draped over my eyes, listening as she padded down the hallway and into the kitchen. Silence. Then the faint rustle of tissue paper. I could picture it without looking. The way she'd stop mid-step, head tilted, the corners of her mouth turning up at the sight of the box on the counter. The pause before she reached out, maybe even letting her fingers skim over the ribbon before untying it. For a moment, she would think this was me making up for last night, smoothing over the raw edge she'd left with her absence. I sat up slowly, listening for the change. It came exactly when I expected, the lid lifting, the paper parting, the stillness thickening into something heavier. Her breath caught, sharp and small, like she'd stepped into cold water. What the hell is this? Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried enough bite to cut through the space between us. I stepped into the kitchen doorway, leaning on the frame. She was standing over the open box, the papers spread in front of her like evidence. The card lay on top, my 4 words staring back at her. "You're kidding, right?" she said, her eyes flashing up to mine. "No," I said evenly. This is insane. You're being dramatic." She gestured at the papers with a sharp flick of her hand. "Over one night out? I told you I was with coworkers." I didn't move closer. "I'm just giving you what you wanted." Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. "What I wanted. You're making up stories in your head. You're overreacting." "Then it shouldn't be a problem," I said, nodding toward the stack. "If I'm wrong, you can sign them right now and prove it's just in my head." She froze. That single second of hesitation said more than anything she could have explained. Her jaw tightened. "I don't have to prove anything to you. This is ridiculous. We're married, and you're throwing it away because you're insecure?" I let the words hang in the air, not rushing to fill the silence. My calm seemed to irritate her more than if I'd raised my voice. She was used to me pushing, chasing, demanding answers. But I didn't want answers anymore, just closure. Her eyes darted from me to the papers and back again. She crossed her arms, the defensive posture almost comically predictable. "You really think you can just end things like this? With a note?" "It's not the note that ends it," I said. "It's everything before it." Color rose in her cheeks. "You've been looking for an excuse. That's what this is. You've been waiting for me to screw up." I shook my head. "No, I was hoping I was wrong. For a long time. But last night just made it clear I wasn't." Her gaze wavered, landing briefly on the marriage license at the top of the stack. I wondered if she saw it the way I did now, not as a promise, but as a timestamp on a story that had run its course. She finally pushed the box away, the ribbon dangling over the edge of the counter. "I'm not doing this right now. I'm late for work." "Take your time," I said. "The papers will still be here when you get back." She shot me a look, not quite anger, not quite guilt. Something in between. The same expression she'd worn the night I caught her deleting messages from her phone before dinner. Then she grabbed her purse, muttered something under her breath I didn't bother catching, and walked out. The front door shut, and the house went quiet again. I walked over to the counter, straightened the stack of papers, and retied the bow. She could try to ignore them, but they'd be waiting. The wine glasses from her birthday dinner were still in the sink. I washed them slowly, the warm water and soap clearing away the faint ring of Merlot. The kitchen looked cleaner than it had in weeks. Lighter. I realized then that I wasn't angry anymore. Not in the way I'd been last night, pacing and replaying every red flag. Now it was just a steady, cold certainty. The kind that doesn't fade with time or apologies. The morning reveal had gone exactly as I expected. She tried to play it down, twist it, make me the irrational one. But she hadn't touched the papers. She hadn't even tried to tear them up. Because deep down, she knew they weren't just mine. They were hers too. And sooner or later, she was going to sign them. She came home early, which told me more than anything she might say. The sun was still up, hanging low and coppery, making gold coins out of dust in the hallway. I was on the couch with a book I wasn't reading, the box centered on the kitchen counter again, like a small black planet tugging the whole house into its orbit. Keys clattered. Purse dropped. A long breath, performative, bracing. Then her heels clicked toward me, a precise staccato that used to mean excitement when she'd run down the hall after a shower and grab my tie, kiss me before it cooled. Now it sounded like a metronome, steady, professional, practiced. "We need to talk," she said, stopping just far enough away to keep her coat on as armor. "I figured," I said, closing the book. She nodded at the box. "That was a cruel joke." "It isn't a joke." Her mouth moved without sound for a second, then the lines fell into place. "Look, last night it was nothing inappropriate. Just a birthday drink that ran long. With coworkers." She emphasized the plural. "Which coworkers?" She rolled her eyes. "You don't know them." "Then introduce me to the idea, at least. Names aren't radioactive." "God, listen to yourself." She unbuttoned her coat, like she was releasing steam. Underneath, a silk blouse I had never seen. "You're treating me like a suspect because I went out on my birthday. I told you, it was with a friend. A coworker." We were at a bar. That's all. Nothing happened. Her perfume drifted over, vanilla at first, then something darker underneath that didn't belong to either of us. I decided not to name it out loud. Naming makes things manageable. I didn't want to manage this for her. I'm not accusing you of a felony, I said. I'm offering you a solution. If I'm wrong, sign the papers. It'll make a point better than any speech. She flinched at the word sign, like it had thorns. I'm not giving this marriage up to prove something I don't have to prove, she said. You're spiraling. She groped for the word. Insecure. I'm calm, I said, and it was true. And I'm finished negotiating with a fog. Innocent people usually want clarity. So sign. Silence hummed between us, the kind you hear right before the orchestra begins. She set her coat across a chair and stepped closer, softening her mouth into that gentle, coaxing version of herself that used to make my knees feel unreliable. Baby, she said, letting the word land lightly. We've been off lately, yes? Work's been crazy. You've been distant. I'm not blaming you. I'm just saying, don't you think we should talk before you throw grenades? I made dinner last night, I said. Your favorite. Candles. Wine. You texted, don't wait up. That was the grenade. She looked at the floor. I shouldn't have said it like that. Then, quickly, but it's not what you think. What do I think? That I'm sleeping with someone. Her eyes snapped up. I'm not. Jesus. He's just a friend. We had drinks. We talked. That's it. How many times? She hesitated. A couple. Work stuff. Where? She blinked. Different places. The hotel lounge with the anonymous name that shows up as Lyndon on our card? The wine bar across the river on Tuesday nights? Color climbed her throat. You've been checking my statements? There are statements. I kept my voice even. You weren't hiding the charges. Just the details. We were talking, she said, too fast now. About a project. About life. He listens. So do I said. I've been doing it for years. I listened when you said you wanted the blue sofa, when you said we should save for Florence, when you said you were too tired for sex, and then laughed at a text like someone had written you a secret poem. I listened last night to the way you smelled like him. I'm still listening. Sign. Her face went tight. She reached for the box and lifted the lid like it weighed something. The marriage license lay there on top, formal and ridiculous. She traced the embossed seal with one finger, then slid it aside and looked at the petition again. When she read the date of separation, today, she laughed once, a short, bright spark of disbelief. You'd really end us like this? She said, quieter. Without trying. We tried, I said. We just called it other names. We called it busy. We called it tired. We called it next month. We called it fine. None of those words worked. She closed the box and placed both palms on the lid. I didn't sleep with him. I let out a slow breath. Maybe not. That's not the point anymore. You've already given away the part of you I needed, the part that turned toward us first. Her hands curled, knuckles pale. So that's it. You want me to just, what? Sign this circus and thank you for my freedom? You don't have to thank me. I nodded at the pen by the fruit bowl. But yes, if you're so sure this is an overreaction, finish the gesture. Or, if you actually want this marriage, say that and mean it, and show me by not needing other men to rehearse your aliveness. Pick a truth. Any truth. But no more smoke. She drew in air like she'd been underwater too long. For a moment, something raw moved across her face. Fear, I thought. The honest kind that admits a thing is slipping out of reach. I waited. I didn't rush into the silence. I'd spent years filling it for her. I don't want a divorce, she said finally, voice low. I don't want to lose you. I've been, I don't know, lonely in a way I can't explain. He made me feel seen. Her mouth trembled, but I didn't have sex with him. I swear. I believed the loneliness. The rest hovered like a coin that might be counterfeit. Then there are simple ways forward, I said. No more late nights. No secret phones. Transparency like oxygen. Counseling. And you text him, now, that you won't be seeing him again. Her eyes flickered, doing math with consequences. That's controlling. It's a boundary. You want the marriage or you want your flattering listener. Choose. She stared at the phone in her hand, thumb drifting to wake the screen, then stopping as if the glass might burn. The room narrowed to that small, undecided motion. A bird called outside, 2 notes, like a question and its echo. I can't do this with you hovering, she said, folding the phone into her palm. I need space. You've had all the space, I said. That's how we got here. She took a step back, then another, until the chair caught her calf. She sat, spine straight, like a student before an exam. I'm not signing today, she said at last. I won't be bullied into it. I'll think. Thinking's fine, I said, taking the box, reading the bow she'd loosened. The papers aren't going anywhere. I set it back on the counter and turned to the sink. The water thundered, plates shone. Behind me, I heard the soft scrape of her chair, the soft click of her heels traveling down the hall, the softer thud of our bedroom door closing. The choreography of retreat, learned steps. I dried my hands and stood alone in the kitchen's gentle hush. Her silence, for once, said everything I needed it to say. Something changed in me the morning after I left those papers on the counter. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was more like a quiet click in the back of my mind, a lock sliding into place. For years, I'd been chasing her approval, bending to her moods, doing whatever it took to keep the peace. But now, I didn't need anything from her, and she felt it. She came into the kitchen that morning wearing one of my shirts, the same one she used to slip into when she wanted to be playful, her way of softening me up before asking for something. She leaned against the counter like nothing had happened. "Coffee?" she asked, almost cheerful. "No thanks," I said, grabbing my travel mug and my keys. No kiss. No extra glance. Just nothing. She frowned, probably expecting at least a sarcastic remark or a heated argument to give her some footing. Instead, I walked out the door, leaving her standing there with her hand still on the coffee pot. Over the next few days, I didn't ask where she was going or who she was texting. I didn't check her location or scroll through our shared bank account to see what she was spending money on. I stopped giving her the satisfaction of knowing she still had me hooked. And the more I pulled away, the more restless she became. The first week, she tried charm, cooking dinner one night, suggesting we talk things through, wearing that perfume she knew I liked. The second week, it was irritation, snide remarks about how cold I'd become, jabs about me acting like a martyr. One night, she slammed her wine glass on the counter hard enough to splash red droplets onto the tile. "You're not even trying," she snapped. I looked up from my plate and said evenly, "Exactly." Her eyes narrowed, searching my face for the man who used to beg for explanations, for reassurance. But he was gone. That's when I realized this was what real control felt like. Not the shouting, not the demands, but the refusal to play the game at all. I'd been running in circles for months, maybe years, trying to keep her attention. Now, I'd stopped running. She didn't like being the one doing the chasing. The calls from her coworker became more frequent. She didn't bother to hide them anymore, maybe hoping I'd explode so she could flip the script and make me the bad guy. But every time I caught her smirking at her phone, I just smiled faintly and went back to whatever I was doing. By the third week, the tension in the house was thick enough to cut. She would linger in the doorway when I was working on my laptop, her arms crossed, her gaze sharp like she was trying to read my mind. I'd nod politely and go back to my emails. It drove her insane. That was the moment I knew, really knew. I wasn't afraid to lose her anymore. I wasn't even sure I wanted her. The woman I married, the one who laughed at my terrible jokes and curled into me on Sunday mornings, had been gone for a long time. All that was left was someone who measured love by how much control she could keep. Well, I'd taken that measurement away. And from the way her voice got sharper and her eyes lingered longer, I could tell she knew she was losing something she couldn't get back. It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of day where nothing feels like it's building toward a climax. I was working late in the home office, the rain tapping against the window, when my phone buzzed. It was Mark. We'd known each other since college, and though we didn't talk every week, he was one of those friends who didn't bother with small talk unless it mattered. His text was short, "Call me. It's about her." My stomach didn't drop. Not this time. I think, deep down, I already knew. When he picked up, there was a long pause on his end before he said, "I wasn't going to get involved, but I can't watch you walk around acting like you don't deserve the truth." I kept my voice flat. "Say it." "It's the guy from her office. The friend. People have seen them. Not just at bars. At his place." He exhaled like he'd been holding it in for weeks. "It's been going on for months. I thought maybe you knew and didn't care, but—" "I know," I said. Silence. "Then, you're not surprised?" "Not anymore." He told me more than I asked for. The way they'd sit close in the corner booth at a place near work, her hand brushing his knee like it was second nature, the lingering looks that weren't part of any work project I'd ever heard of. She hadn't just crossed a line. She'd set up camp on the other side. When we hung up, I didn't go storming into the living room to confront her. I didn't scroll through my phone looking for proof to throw in her face. I didn't need to. Her behavior had been the proof, and now I had the confirmation to match. That night, she came home smelling faintly of rain and something spicier, not the vanilla perfume she used to wear for me. She kicked off her shoes and glanced toward the office, clearly gauging whether I'd bite if she made conversation. I didn't. I just nodded once and went back to my laptop. Over the next few days, I weaponized my silence. No accusations, no demands. Just distance. I could see it starting to unnerve her. She'd linger in doorways, watching me like she wanted to say something but couldn't figure out the angle. I'd answer her small talk with one-word replies, polite but hollow. One night, she tried to bait me. "You've been quiet lately," she said over dinner, her fork tapping against the plate. "Just thinking," I replied. About what I want life to look like in 6 months." I didn't look up. She shifted in her chair. "And does that picture have me in it?" I finally met her eyes, holding them long enough for her to squirm. "That depends on you." She didn't ask what I meant. Maybe she didn't want to hear it out loud. Mark's voice echoed in my head for the rest of the week. It's been going on for months. Every time she reached for her phone, every time she laughed at a message she didn't share, it was just more confirmation. I didn't need to trap her in a lie. She was living in it. And the more I refused to call her out, the more it felt like I was the one in control. She could hide behind her denials all she wanted, but we both knew the truth had already slipped into the open. The only thing left was deciding when and how I was going to end the game for good. A week later, I found myself walking into a friend's backyard party with a six-pack in hand and a calmness I hadn't felt in months. The sun was low, spilling gold over the lawn, the air warm enough for people to cluster in little knots of conversation. She wasn't with me. I hadn't even asked if she wanted to come. The host, a mutual friend named Jenna, raised an eyebrow when she saw me alone. "No +1 tonight?" she asked, handing me a glass. "Nope," I said simply. Thought I'd give her the night off. Jenna didn't push, but the look she gave me told me she'd heard whispers. That was the thing about our circle. Gossip traveled faster than text messages. If one person knew about her friendship with the coworker, it wouldn't be long before everyone did. As I moved through the crowd, I could feel eyes on me. Curious, maybe even a little sympathetic. I made a point of smiling, laughing when someone cracked a joke, leaning into conversations like a man who wasn't carrying a slow-burning grenade in his personal life. It was liberating, in a strange way. For months, I'd been walking into social situations with her at my side, plastering on a smile while wondering who knew what, who was guessing, who was pretending not to see the tension. Tonight, the weight was gone. I wasn't defending anything anymore. Halfway through the evening, I overheard 2 people near the grill. They didn't see me behind them. "Heard she's been spending a lot of time with that guy from work," one said. "Yeah, not exactly subtle," the other replied. "Poor guy?" "Poor guy?" I almost laughed. Not because they were wrong, but because I didn't feel like the victim they thought I was. The victim had been me 6 months ago, chasing answers, trying to compete with a man I hadn't even met. Now, I was already halfway out the door. Later, while people were grabbing plates of food, Jenna came over again. She kept her voice low. "So, is it true?" I didn't ask her to clarify. "Yes," I said. Her face softened. "And you're just okay with being here tonight?" I shrugged. Why wouldn't I be? It's her mess. I'm just cleaning my side of the street. Word spread faster after that. I could tell by the way people started to approach me, each one trying to find a way to say they'd heard without outright admitting they'd been talking. I let them talk, nodding here and there, keeping my tone even. I wasn't going to give anyone the satisfaction of a meltdown story they could tell later. Around 9, as the sky deepened into that soft blue before full dark, I stepped out onto the porch with a beer. The sound of laughter floated up from the yard, warm and careless. I realized then that I hadn't thought about her for more than a passing moment all night. That was the gift I'd given myself, distance. Space where she didn't occupy every corner of my mind. I imagined her at home, maybe texting him, maybe scrolling through Instagram and seeing photos from the party. She'd notice I looked relaxed, that I wasn't hanging on the edges of conversations like a man waiting to be pulled aside for the talk. That would bother her more than anything I could say. Because the truth was, this night wasn't just a social event. It was a signal. To our friends, to her, maybe even to myself. I was moving on. By the time I left, the air had cooled and the street was quiet. I drove home with the windows down, the hum of the tires and the rhythm of the wind filling the space where my thoughts used to be. Her birthday had been a week ago. She'd gotten her gift then, the papers, the note, the choice. But tonight was the one she'd remember. Not because I confronted her, not because I made a scene, but because for the first time in years, she wasn't the center of my life. And everyone could see it. The divorce papers sat on the counter for nearly a month, like an uninvited guest who refused to leave. Every few days, I'd noticed the box had been moved, from the counter to the dining table, from the table to the edge of her desk, but it always found its way back to the kitchen, ribbon still tied, lid still closed. She couldn't bring herself to throw it away, and she couldn't bring herself to open it again either. In the meantime, she cycled through every tactic in the book. Week 1 was charm. She cooked dinner twice, wore dresses she hadn't touched in years, even suggested a spontaneous weekend trip. I declined each offer with polite indifference. Week 2 was guilt. She accused me of giving up too easily, claimed I was erasing our history over a misunderstanding. Week 3 was provocation. She stayed out late again, not quite as late as her birthday, but late enough that I knew she wanted me to ask where she'd been. I didn't. When she came home smelling faintly of someone else's cologne, I just nodded from the couch and went back to my book. By week 4, something in her had shifted. The fire was gone from her eyes. She moved through the house quietly, her phone tucked away, her words fewer and softer. She'd stopped trying to win me back and started, I think, preparing herself for the end she could no longer delay. The morning it happened was unremarkable. Gray skies, light drizzle tapping against the windows. I was at the table with my coffee when she walked in, hair pulled back, eyes a little puffy like she hadn't slept well. She didn't look at me as she opened the drawer where we kept pens. When she turned, the black box was in her hands. She set it on the table and slid it toward me. "I'll sign them," she said. I didn't move right away. No argument. She shook her head. "I'm tired." There was a heaviness in her voice that I recognized, not just from her, but from myself in the weeks before I decided to let go. That final stage where the fight drains out and all that's left is the truth you've been avoiding. I untied the ribbon, opened the lid, and took out the papers. She sat across from me, silent, watching as I laid them flat on the table. Her hand didn't shake as she signed. Neat, deliberate strokes, like she was filling out a form at the DMV. When she finished, she pushed the stack back toward me. "There, it's done." I gathered the papers, slid them into a fresh envelope, and placed it in my bag. "Thank you," I said. That made her look up. "For what?" "For not dragging this out any longer than you already have." She opened her mouth like she might argue, then closed it again. Her eyes dropped to the table. There were no tears from me, no parting speech, no last-ditch plea for her to admit to everything. We were past that. She knew what she'd done, and I knew who she'd become. That was enough. I stood, slung my bag over my shoulder, and headed for the door. She stayed at the table, staring at the black box, now empty except for the tissue paper. Outside, the drizzle had turned to a steady rain. I walked to my car without looking back, slid into the driver's seat, and started the engine. As I pulled away, I realized I didn't feel relief or sadness, just a quiet, solid certainty that I'd made the right choice. The final signature hadn't been the end of something worth saving. It had been the last step in setting both of us free. 3 months after the signature, I was standing in my new kitchen, smaller, simpler, quiet, flipping eggs in a skillet that didn't have a single scratch she'd put there. The apartment was nothing fancy, just a one-bedroom with a balcony barely big enough for a chair and a potted plant. But it was mine. Every square foot felt like neutral ground. No ghosts in the corners, no lingering scent of her perfume mixed with another man's cologne. The first weeks alone had been strange. The silence was almost too much, the absence of her footsteps a reminder of what was gone. But gradually, the space filled with other sounds. Music drifting from the radio while I cooked, the hum of my laptop as I wrote late into the night, the creak of the balcony chair when I leaned back with a beer and let the city noise take over. I found myself rediscovering things I'd abandoned. My guitar, tucked away in the back of a closet for years, now leaned against the wall where I could pick it up anytime. I started running again. Early in the mornings before work, the air sharp and clean in my lungs. I cooked meals just for me, exactly how I liked them, without worrying about whether she'd approve. Her name still came up sometimes. Mutual friends would ask, cautiously, how I was doing. I'd tell them the truth. Better. That was all. I didn't need to rehash the details anymore. The story had lost its power over me. From what I'd heard, she was still seeing him. Or maybe she'd moved on to someone else. Either way, it didn't matter. I wasn't watching her live from the sidelines anymore. I wasn't in it, and I didn't want to be. Her birthday came around again in the middle of summer. The date was on my phone calendar out of habit, but when the reminder popped up, it didn't hit me like it used to. I didn't picture her smile, or the way she'd lean in close when she wanted something. I didn't picture the box, the papers, or the look on her face when she read the note. Instead, I thought about what I was going to do that evening. Meet a couple of friends at a little rooftop bar downtown, have a drink, maybe catch some live music after. The day moved forward without a single tug from the past. And that's when I understood something. The silent gift I'd given her wasn't just the divorce. It was the space for both of us to stop pretending. But it had been a gift for me, too. The permission to stop fighting battles I'd already lost, to stop building a home with someone who kept a foot out the door. The quiet in my apartment that night was different than it had been in the early days. Back then, it had been the silence of something missing. Now, it was the silence of something whole. I sat on the balcony with a drink, watching the lights blink on across the city. Somewhere out there, she was probably blowing out candles, maybe laughing with him, maybe not. Either way, it didn't matter. I wasn't her husband anymore. I wasn't the man pacing the living room, waiting for her to come home, pretending not to smell another man on her skin. I was free, and for the first time in years, that was enough.